Imagine a democracy's hard drive. Over the years, it gets cluttered up with corrupted files, right? You've got ghost voters who have passed away or moved on. But at the exact same time, millions of newly eligible young citizens are literally locked out of the system. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're looking at how a nation actually reboots its democratic foundation through a massive operation known as the Special Intensive Revision of Electoral Rolls.
Think about the sheer scale of that problem for a second. If you have an election where phantom voters are casting ballots, but real, living, breathing 18-year-olds can't even get their foot in the door, well, the system's legitimacy just completely collapses. So to prevent a systemic failure right before high-stakes elections, the electoral roll requires a monumental, intensive cleanup operation. We're not talking about a quick software patch here. It's a full-scale, on-the-ground, physical audit of democracy.
The stakes really couldn't be higher. The whole objective is to move from a seriously flawed reality, a list plagued with errors, duplicates, and deceased voters, to the absolute democratic ideal. We want an accurate, inclusive, and legitimate electoral roll. It's about getting back to that ultimate baseline of one person, one vote.
To really master this concept, we're going to break it down step by step. We'll look at the integrity of the vote, the legal foundations, the actual ground-level mechanics, the risks of exclusion, and finally, the systemic safeguards. First up, the integrity of the vote and why we're purging the system. So the trigger for all of this is pre-election readiness. Following a highly successful initial rollout in Bihar, the Election Commission deployed this intensive drive across 12 states and union territories. And notice that highly specific time frame between November 3rd and December 5th. This isn't just some continuous background process. It's a rapid, highly concentrated sprint designed to secure the entire system before major electoral events kick off. Now look at the dual nature of this mandate. It's not just about deleting, it's equally about capturing. Sure, the system is aggressively eliminating deceased and duplicate entries to kill off those ghost voters. But simultaneously, it's sweeping up newly eligible 18-year-olds and accounting for massive demographic shifts, like millions of people migrating from rural villages to urban centers. The ultimate impact? Restoring unshakable public trust before Election Day. Moving right along to the constitutional and legal foundation, the twin pillars of authority, because an operation of this magnitude absolutely requires unquestionable legal backing. It all relies on these twin pillars of authority. First, the big picture, the constitutional basis. Article 324 gives the Election Commission ultimate control, while Article 326 guarantees adult suffrage for anyone over 18. But the Constitution is broad, right? To actually execute the process, you need the statutory basis. The Representation of the People Act of 1950, or RPA, provides the precise mechanical gears, the nuts and bolts to make that constitutional vision a reality. And the absolutely crucial point is right here. Section 21, subsection 3 of the RPA 1950. If you want to really understand the mechanics, lock this specific section into your memory. Why? Because this is the exact legal trigger that separates this massive disruptive operation from your standard routine annual updates. This provision essentially acts as an emergency button. The Election Commission can hit this special revision button at any time it deems necessary to secure the vote. Okay, so let's look at how this process actually works on the ground, the micro-mechanisms of the revision. Let's move from constitutional theory down to the dusty roads and neighborhood streets. It all comes down to the booth-level officers, or BLOs. In Step 1, thousands of these officers literally go house to house. But Step 2 is where the real magic and, frankly, the real challenge happens. They use a critical verification test. They ask voters to trace their family registration back to the 2002 to 2005 legacy rolls. If you can link your name to that old data, you're mostly in the clear. But as Step 3 shows, if you're a new entry or untraceable to those legacy rolls, boom, a much stricter document verification process is immediately triggered. But here's where things get tricky. Let's talk about the risk of exclusion and the unintended consequences of accuracy. Because implementing incredibly tight security measures inherently creates the risk of locking out the very people the democracy is trying to protect. This reveals the central, undeniable tension of the entire process. On one side, you have the uncompromising pursuit of accuracy to secure the system. But on the other side, the very real risk of excluding legitimate citizens through rigid documentation barriers. It's a delicate, high-stakes tightrope walk between security and accessibility. When we break down those risks,
a pretty clear pattern emerges. Who usually gets left behind? Often, it's the poorest, the marginalized, and internal migrants. Critics of the process highlight a major concern here. Demanding legacy documents from 20 years ago can accidentally function as a de facto citizenship test. If a legitimate citizen simply lacks the paper trail to prove their parentage, they risk losing their constitutional right to vote. Furthermore, in a massive operation involving thousands of BLOs, simple human error can accidentally wipe a totally legitimate family off the map.
So, how do we fix that? That brings us to safeguards and balancing mechanisms, how the system protects the voter. To prevent a crisis of mass disenfranchisement, a strict timeline builds a protective wall for the citizen. On December 9th, a draft roll is published. Now remember, it's not final. From that day until January 8th, a highly specific window opens for claims and objections. If your name is missing, this is your time to legally fight back. Beyond that, there's a structured appeals process that goes all the way up to the district magistrate and the chief electoral officer. The system is fundamentally designed to give you a chance to prove your legitimacy before the vault is permanently sealed. Now, here's a fascinating and absolutely critical operational detail that trips people up all the time. You might think, well, I have my Aadhaar card, I'm fine, right? Not exactly. While Aadhaar definitely confirms your identity, it is absolutely not sufficient on its own to prove your age and citizenship eligibility for the electoral roll. If you cannot establish that link to the legacy rolls we talked about earlier, you must provide one of 13 specific historical documents alongside your Aadhaar to prove you actually have the right to vote. Finally, let's wrap this up with a final revision and analysis to really master these concepts. Let's consolidate this into 5 quick takeaways. First, we start with the core philosophy, enforcing one person, one vote. Second, the legal muscle comes from Article 324 and RPA Section 21.3. Third, the ground game relies entirely on BLOs tracing those legacy roots. Fourth, always remember that massive systemic tension, accuracy versus exclusion. And finally, the specific draft roll timeline acts as the ultimate safeguard for the citizen. To truly synthesize this explainer, you'll want to lock these precise keywords into your mental framework. Adult suffrage, RPA 1950, Section 21.3, the BLOs, the 2002 to 2005 legacy rolls, and that incredibly important phrase, the de facto citizenship test. Having these terms ready is absolutely essential for understanding how democratic systems actually maintain their integrity. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. As we've seen today, cleaning the system is non-negotiable for a fair election. But how does a democracy perfectly balance the pristine cleanliness of its digital and paper systems with the fundamental constitutional right of every single citizen to participate? Does the pursuit of a flawless list justify the hurdles placed in front of the most vulnerable among us? It's the ultimate balancing act of modern governance. Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the systems that shape our world.